When we stand in a place like this, full of temples and images of the gods and signs of people trying to get in touch with the gods and make them happy, the question naturally arises for us, what is prayer? What does the New Testament have to say about prayer? There are two extremes you can go to with prayer. For some people, the gods or a god are all around us, perhaps within us and within the world, so that prayer is simply a matter of getting in touch with the divinity which is around and about us all the time, perhaps even inside us. For other people, and perhaps for most people in the modern Western world, there's a more Epicurean view that the gods, if they exist, are a long way away. And if you need to get in touch with them, you're going to have to shout awfully loud or develop some special techniques to get over this great void between us and them. For the ancient Jewish people, it was never like either of those things. Their God was both the creator of the world and the one who had entered into a covenant agreement with them to be their God and they would be his people. And again in the Old Testament, we can see Jewish figures like Abraham and Moses and David in the Psalms wrestling with God, shouting at God, telling him off, "Why don't you wake up? It's time for you to do something." There's a holy boldness which comes through. And the New Testament picks up on more or less exactly that, because in the New Testament we find at several points things which in the Old Testament were prayers coming out in the New as a fresh invocation of this God, only now this God who has revealed himself in Jesus to be intimately involved with our life and indeed to be suffering our death and to be taking us through and on to a new life beyond death. And so the New Testament writers speak of praying constantly, of being always in touch with this true God by invoking Jesus as the one who has made that firm bridge, that ultimate link between the world of the divine and the world of the humans. And by the power of the Spirit, they insist that we are to be inhabitants of that world through prayer, both formal prayer. They pick up some of the ancient Jewish prayers like the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," and they develop a Christian version of that, but also informal prayers, when Paul talks about what he prays for the people who he's writing to. And he's praying day by day that they will be built up, that they'll come to a knowledge and love, and so on. And sometimes when Paul is writing quite extensive theological treatments of subjects, he frames them with prayer. 1 Corinthians 8, 9 and 10 as an example, with Jewish prayer to the one God who has revealed himself in Jesus, holding that whole section together. Or in Romans 9, 10 and 11, when he begins with a lament and ends with a praise, and in the middle focuses on intercession, so that that whole exposition is framed just the way some of the longer Psalms in the Old Testament are framed, with lament and praise, but ultimately in the middle saying to God, "Come on, it's time to do something. Please, will you now step in and make this or that happen?" And ultimately in the Gospels, what we see is Jesus going around doing good, healing people, celebrating, and ultimately going off to die for the sins of the world. And we find people coming to Jesus and addressing him, "Please help me about this. Please, why don't you do something about that?" Whatever it may be. And the early Christians, in reading the Gospels, took these stories as models of prayer. They're very vivid stories. We today can make them our own, so that whatever position we are in, whether it's joyful or sorrowful or puzzled or questioning, whatever it may be, the Gospels bring all this great biblical teaching on prayer into focus and says we too can come to Jesus and tell him exactly what's on our hearts and minds and ask him to hold on to it and enable us to get through it, and if possible, to do something about it.